A big spotlight has been shone onto Allied escape attempts from German prisoner-of-war camps, resulting in a huge number of books and films over the past 70 years, including classics like the Colditz story, Stalag 17, and of course The Great Escape. They were united in portraying the prisoners as determined to get back in the war, and though in reality only a small minority of POWs actually attempted to escape, these men formed a hard core of patriotic resistors to the Germans who used every ingenious trick they could think of to make it home or to a neutral nation. But what about German POWs? Hundreds of thousands ended up in camps in Britain, Canada, and the United States. Did they not try and escape too? Well, in point of fact, many Germans felt the same way Allied POWs felt. They yearned to be free, to see their families again, and to rejoin the war. And like Allied prisoners, they launched many daring and ingenious escape attempts that are largely forgotten today. And none was more ingenious and bold than that hatched by two Luftwaffe pilots held captive in England in 1941. It ranks as one of the most extraordinary escape attempts of World War II. For German POWs sent to camps in Britain, they faced one really big problem if they managed to escape. The place is an island, and to reach German-occupied Europe would entail a sea crossing. As all ports and harbours were carefully guarded, all ships carefully checked, and all beaches patrolled and sometimes mined because of anti-invasion precautions, reaching the coast and finding a boat was a very difficult proposition. Another factor is Britain's size. It's a relatively small and well-populated country, meaning that there isn't much wilderness to hide in. Any escape would entail interaction with locals, always a dangerous proposition for an escapee. But there was one aspect of life in wartime Britain that could be exploited by those bold enough to try. Tens of thousands of foreign servicemen and women had escaped to Britain as the Germans conquered Europe, and they had formed national contingents in support of their respective exile governments. There were Poles, Danes, Dutch, Norwegians, French, Belgians, Czechoslovaks, and many others. The RAF had many foreign squadrons. For example, during the Battle of Britain, 18% of all German aircraft shot down were destroyed by Polish pilots in the RAF. Pretending to be foreign servicemen in Britain offered one way escaped German POWs could remain at large, but it would still require convincing uniforms and identification papers. The Battle of Britain had led to hundreds of German airmen being shot down and taken prisoner in Britain, among them two young officers who were determined to escape captivity. Lieutenant Heinz Schnabel was an ace, having downed 6 enemy aircraft in combat, 3 Bristol Blenheims and 3 Spitfires, flying the Messerschmitt Bf 109E. But his luck had run out on the 5th of September 1940 when he was escorting a force of Heinkel 111 and Dornier 17 bombers on a raid on southern England. Intercepted by a Spitfire, Schnabel's 109 was damaged and he made a forced landing in a field near Aldington in Kent. Injured in the crash, once recovered, Schnabel was interrogated at the London Cage, a special centre used to pump German airmen for information, and eventually sent to Camp No. 1, an officers' camp at Grisdale Hall in Cumbria, in a remote part of northern England, a close neighbour being children's author Beatrix Potter. At Grisdale, Schnabel became friendly with bomber pilot Oberleutnant Harry Wappler, who had been captured on the 12th of September 1940, flying a Heinkel 111 in a raid on Ellesmere Port near Liverpool. His aircraft had been downed by a barrage balloon cable, and Wappler had bailed out, breaking his arm and being knocked unconscious when he landed in a street in Newport. In spring 1941, Schnabel and Wappler were transferred to a new camp at the converted Shapwell's Hotel, 25 miles east of Grisdale. The former luxury hotel now had armed sentries and a barbed wire fence and searchlights. The POWs worked in the camp and were often taken out for exercise, enabling covert reconnaissance of the surrounding area. The Germans discovered that the mainline railway between London and Glasgow in Scotland ran close to the camp, and at a place called Shap Bank, the steep gradient caused trains to slow to a walking pace. The two pilots also noted RAF aircraft regularly overflying the camp. The types were Miles Magisters and Tiger Moths, simple-to-fly training aircraft. After much intelligence gathering, the prisoners located the aircraft's base, RAF Kingstown, north of the city of Carlisle. You can see where I'm going with this tale. A handy rail line running close to an RAF base, full of basic trainers. All the Germans needed to do was dream up plausible disguises and work out how to escape from the camp. The problem of Britain being an island would be overcome. Schnabel and Wappler could fly to freedom if they could steal a plane at Kingstown. Many months of planning went into the escape. Schnabel and Wappler decided to pose as Dutch airmen in the RAF and would wear faked-up uniforms over their Luftwaffe uniforms. They wore their German uniforms so that they could not be accused of being spies or saboteurs if caught during the escape. The camp forger produced 2 sets of ID documents. Schnabel became Pilot Officer George David and Wappler Flight Lieutenant Harry Graven of the RAF. Both Germans could speak some English, enough to come across convincingly as Dutch officers. They launched their escape on the 24th of November 1941. They hid in a specially hollowed-out log pile in the camp's grounds that the prisoners had prepared. The other prisoners managed to conceal their missing comrades during roll calls and room checks. Once it was dark, Schnabel and Wappler emerged from their hiding place and crept along an irrigation ditch to the perimeter fence. Thick fog masked the view from the guard towers, and the Germans got through the fence using homemade tools. They walked to the railway line at Shap Bank and waited until a goods train slowed down as it negotiated the steep incline, and they climbed aboard for a free ride to Carlisle. They wasted some time in a local cinema and then casually joined groups of RAF personnel who were walking back the 2 miles to Kingstown. Their fake uniforms and passes got them through the main gate and onto the RAF base. Hiding up behind a hangar, they waited for daybreak. During the morning, the 2 Germans watched as multiple training aircraft departed on instructional flights. Later, they spotted a pair of Magisters on the far side of the airfield, well away from all the buildings. Walking up to one of the aircraft, Wappler told the civilian apprentice who was working on it that he and the other Dutch officer were to carry out a taxiing test. The apprentice accepted the request and started the Magister up and removed the chocks from beneath the wheels. The 2 Germans then motored to the end of the runway and, to the amazement of the apprentice, promptly took off. The apprentice informed his superior that 2 crazy Poles had disobeyed orders and flown off without parachutes. The news reached the station commander, who checked the story and informed group headquarters that 2 unknown pilots had stolen an aircraft. The Miles Magister was a bit of a come-down for the experienced German pilots. Its cruising speed was 123 miles per hour, with a maximum range on full tanks of 380 miles. Both Germans were not equipped for flying, particularly in November. Neither had parachutes, flying helmets, goggles, or flight suits, just their fake Dutch greatcoats over their Luftwaffe uniforms. As it was winter, the cold was extreme. So where were they headed? From their location at Carlisle, the closest neutral territory was the Republic of Ireland, a short 150-mile hop across the Irish Sea. But Schnabel and Wappler had rejected Southern Ireland, as they would be interned for the duration, merely swapping one prison camp for another. The other alternative was far more hazardous, flying to the German-occupied Netherlands across the North Sea, a distance of some 365 miles. They would probably have to land somewhere else in England to obtain sufficient fuel for the journey. Using a basic map that Wappler had obtained whilst a POW and flying at 2,000 feet, the two Germans passed the city of Leeds. They then flew across the Wash between Lincolnshire and Norfolk and headed out to sea, hoping the fuel would be sufficient. However, it took Wappler some time to work out how to operate the fuel cocks to get readings on the wing tanks, and the results were indeed alarming. Both tanks were nearly empty. If they continued, they would run out of fuel and have to ditch in the freezing sea. Having no life jackets or a rubber dinghy, they would die. Wappler turned around and headed back towards the Norfolk coast. Running practically on fumes, Wappler managed to set the Magister down in a field at Scratby, a village 5 miles north of the coastal town of Great Yarmouth. Locals arrived to help them, the Dutch pilot cover story serving the Germans well. A policeman arrived, and Wappler explained that they had become lost flying to Croydon Airport and run out of fuel. He checked their fake ID papers and accepted their story. The Germans needed fuel. The police sergeant took the Germans to Caister police station. At the station, the Germans were told that the nearest RAF base was at Horsham St Faith, now Norwich International Airport, 15 miles away. Wappler spoke on the telephone to the duty officer at Horsham St Faith. Regarding fuel, the Magister couldn't be refueled until the following morning. A truck was sent to collect the Germans and take them to the temporary quarters at the officers' mess. At RAF Horsham St Faith, they were given a room and the Germans decided to have baths. But their luck finally ran out. A message was given to an administrative officer that a Magister had been stolen from RAF Kingstown by 2 escaped Luftwaffe officers. He and the station commander armed themselves with service revolvers and marched into the Germans' room, placing them under arrest. The British admired the Germans' pluck and gave them a send-off dinner in the officers' mess. The station commander then handed them over to RAF police, with the parting words, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, you deserve better luck." Schnabel and Wappler received 28 days solitary confinement for their outrageous stunt, and in spring 1942 they were sent to camps in Canada with lots of other German POWs. Both men never escaped again and survived the war. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.